Hello everybody, I miss you. I'm in an empty classroom and it's super awkward. Here's my first attempt to dethrone ACDC economics, and so this is Climonomics. I just made that up. Okay, so last week on Thursday, we looked at doing per unit costs. We, I think, graphed both of these. We graphed total cost curve, and then we also created an average, like a per unit cost graph as well. So we've worked with this, we understand this, and I just want to quickly recap. Really what we're looking at is production. This is what we're talking about right now. We're looking at what companies can actually produce. And so here's an example of a company that if they're producing nothing, they still have fixed costs of 100, which means they still got to pay probably their rent. Okay, so that's what we can assume by that. And then as you can see, as they scale up, as they make more, you can see that like the total cost is still going to go up, but what really matters is the average total cost is going to go down. And it's going to go down significantly from 110 to 20.9, because that's what you're trying to do as a company. You're trying to figure out, how do we create more at a lower cost? That's every company's objective. So we can look at total cost, that's great, that's like the big picture numbers, but we can actually look at average total cost, and it's gonna give us a little bit more information, okay? And then the last thing we can pull from this that's really important is always this thing, this marginal cost. And everybody knows marginal means additional. We would never forget that because we're all really smart people. And so we can see that the additional cost at first is a lot, okay? When we scale up and start to make 1, the additional cost is 10, then 6, then 5, then 5, then 4. Okay? And so what we start to see is our additional costs are diminishing, so we're doing good, okay? Our marginal costs are going down, but then our marginal costs start to go up, because as we start to scale up, it just becomes more and more expensive. We're just not getting as much in return out of that scaled up production. And so that's essentially what's going on there. And so then what we can do is we can take all this and actually graph it, and that's what we care about. What does it look like on a graph? So here's the graph. This is what we can see. We can see our key 4 lines, and this is a per unit cost graph, and this is really what matters. We need to be able to see this because we can actually, from this graph, we can actually figure out the total cost. I'll show you how to do that in a second, but we can see some important stuff. First thing, our average fixed cost, we can see that continues to decline as we produce more. And it makes sense because at first, on average, it costs us a lot if we're producing very little. And as we produce more, on average, our fixed costs will drop. And those fixed costs are always set, so they're always the same. And so as we just make more, on average, our AFC is gonna be smaller. It'll just keep getting smaller, 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 smaller. Okay, we know that. Our ATC, our average total cost, we can see that at first our average total costs are expensive. Then on the average, we get to our lowest point, which that's gonna tell us a lot. This is a little foreshadowing, that's gonna be super important. And then we can see on average, as we produce more and more, our average total costs start to go up. So basically, like, we lose efficiency. We're just not as good at producing whatever this item is. We're not as good at producing it at those higher numbers. Okay? And then we can also see our average variable cost, and we can see that goes down, and then it starts to go up. And so once again, it tells us we're not great at producing at those higher numbers. We're probably really good at producing right around here, okay? That's the spot that really matters, because that's when our ATC, our average total cost, is the lowest. And so that tells us that maybe that's how much we want to produce, and if the price is above that, then things are looking up. They're looking really good. All right, and then the last line that tends to be like really important, we always talk about this thing, our marginal cost line. It's shaped like a hook, okay? And you can see that at first, when these are going down, when ATC and AVC is going down, so is your marginal cost. And then marginal cost starts to go up, and when marginal cost gets above ATC and AVC, it's almost like it's pulling those up. So they kind of work together, all 3 of these lines. They go down, and then when marginal cost starts to go way up, it starts to pull those up. And I'll talk more about that probably tomorrow. I think I'll get into that and just kind of explain like the tiny details of what why that's going on. But right now, we just want to get comfortable at being able to look at all of this. Okay, and understand our different lines. Marginal cost, additional cost per unit, ATC, average total cost, a really important line that we'll continue to go back to, okay, AVC, and then AFC. All right, and so why from now on we'll probably only look at per unit cost graphs, and I'll show you that in like 2 seconds if I can get my mouse to work. It's not working, so that's why I'm going to disappear for a second. So why we care about per unit costs is because what we can do is we can actually figure out what total costs are, variable costs, and fixed costs are by looking at the per unit cost curve. And so let's say we're producing at quantity Q, okay, this quantity right here, we can actually figure out what our total costs are just by taking Q and multiplying it by C. Okay, Q times C is going to tell us what our total costs are because Q is the amount that we're producing, and then C represents our average total cost. So on average, that's what it costs. And so if we multiply those together, we figure out what our total costs are. And then we can figure out what our variable costs are by looking at AVC. And if we're at Q, we just go there and then we come across to B. Okay, and that's going to tell us Q times B actually equals our variable cost. And then we can even figure out what our fixed costs are by using the average. And we can take Q, go up to this point, it's about F, okay? And we can take this point times A, okay? So Q times A, that right there, that's gonna tell us what our total fixed costs are. And so that's why we like to use these per unit cost graphs, because we can actually, from here, we can figure out what our total costs are, okay? So, I want to actually now go back a little bit and just look at a couple key details when we're looking at this graph. Once again, the same exact thing. Okay? One thing that you'll notice with the ATC and the AVC, they're always going to be as far apart as this line right here, as AFC. And so that distance is going to be that distance between these two lines, because that distance between here is represented by the average fixed cost. To get average total cost, you take average fixed cost and average variable cost and you add them together. So that's why that distance is always going to be consistent. And then the last thing is, these two will always keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as your costs continue to go up and up and up. Okay, but they're going to get bigger, but they're never going to actually touch. Okay, so they'll get closer and closer, but never really touch, just because you're always going to have some type of fixed cost. Okay, even if it's like incredibly like small. So there we go. This is my first attempt. Probably not very good. I'll get better. I promise I'll get better. I just need a crowd, so I need to find like a hype man or something to get me going a little bit. Okay, so sorry if this was not very good, but tomorrow's will be really, really good.